Detroit Den 313. We are back, Stephen Will, talking that Detroit Lions football. Before we get started, you know what to do. Bang that subscribe button. Do not forget the bell icon so you don't miss any of our new content. Steve, talk to him.
Yeah, we're going to be talking a little bit of Mikey Sainristil, and we had talked about him before. It's been a while. It was pre-free agency. It was kind of one of the first players I think we talked about, but I think I have a different type of insight on Mike Sainristil now in a positive way. So we're gonna touch up on it a little bit. Local kid, he deserves a little extra time. You know, he played for the national champion Michigan Wolverines. We could do a second episode on you. That's how I feel. But
I like that. Put some respect on his name.
yeah, national champion, captain
Yes,
Mike
yes,
Sainristil, Michigan
yes,
legend Mike Sainristil. So how do you feel about little old Mikey?
I feel like if he knew that you were calling him little old Mikey, he might have a problem with that.
Listen,
But
I'm calling him little for a reason. Will I'm calling him
yeah.
when you're 5'9", $180, I can call you little.
Hey, well, yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. No, man, he's a dog, man. He's a dog. We talked a little bit off air, but I think that he kind of reminds me of a meek man in a sense. He's a pit bull. He's a pit bull. He's tenacious. He's relentless. He's not gonna back down from anybody. I think that the only thing that I don't know about a meek is his football IQ, but we know about Mikey's football IQ. It's talked about by Jim Harbaugh and everybody that he plays with.
Opposing teams talk about it.
Absolutely. So he's a guy that's a hard worker, and he's a guy that plays the game from a very intelligent level. And when I think about some of the guys that we brought in as of late, and by guys I mean Sam Laporta and Jameer Gibbs, and those are two things that are often thrown around with those guys: how intelligent football players that they are. Not only are they relentless, not only are they tenacious, not only are they disciplined, they're super intelligent. They get to the business. They study their playbooks. They know what the checks are, and I think that's exactly what you would get. And Mikey, if he came to the Detroit Lions, I think that he's an absolute fit for us. He's a guy that I hope that we can get on later on in the draft. And I don't know, man, in a situation that we're in where we're talking about maybe drafting a guy at 29, I would rather see us get him later in the draft. And then, maybe we use an extra piece to go get Dallas Turner, like you talked about in a previous episode, or Jared Verse, or maybe we just really go crazy with this thing, man, and we get all of the pieces. We go get our receiver, we go get our corner, and we get our edge rusher, and we just go dominate a Super Bowl. How you feel?
When I think of Mike Sainristil, I don't think there's very many positions on a football field where he can't play. He came to Michigan as a wide receiver, played very well. Jim Harbaugh saw something and said, I think he would just be better off as a defensive back. And when that happened, I said, man, our offense at the time wasn't like an elite powerhouse. We were still kind of in the stages of figuring out Michigan was when Mike made that conversion. So when he went over to defense, I kind of thought like, man, we're giving up offense for a guy who's probably not going to work out as a corner. How wrong I was. I'd say he was one of the top 5 most impactful defensive players to come through the University of Michigan. And at one point I said, number 2. I maybe reeled that in a little bit because, yeah. Okay. Hammer me if you need to. You think he's number 1?
No, you were tossing that.
Yeah.
Who besides? And if we're taking Charles Woodson on the table, he's number 1.
I did say that, but then shame on me. I'll admit it. Hammer me if you want to in the comments. I forgot about a guy by the name of Aiden Hutchinson. Yeah, Ty Law. I don't know, but he's in the top 5. I'll definitely say that. But I think he could play any position. If you needed him to in an absolute emergency, like I said, he could come in and play receiver. If we're banged up, our receiver room's looking a little questionable. It's not my ideal situation. I'm just saying it could happen if the situation presented itself. He could play outside corner. He could play nickel. I think he could probably mess around and play a little bit of safety if we had him, if we needed him to. But we also talked about these new kickoff rules. I see a guy we could throw out there for these kickoff rules. We talked about some wrinkles. I'll tag that video at the end of this episode so you have a little bit more context. We're just playing a little chess with what's going to happen on these kickoff rules. I think Sainristil could be a guy you could see out there who gets the ball in his hands.
Without a doubt, man. I think that if you are a reserve defensive back with those type of skills from a defensive and offensive perspective, and now that allows you to be a guy as you develop, you can make an impact not only running down as a gunner on special teams. Now you can get that ball in your hands. Now maybe we can do some reverses. We can do some cool stuff. And with having him involved, because he's an absolute athlete, not just a football player. And what does Brad talk about? Got to say it again. Wants
Positionless football.
positionless football. He wants weapons, not guys that fit into positions. So I think that's what he is, man. I think he fits the mold of a guy that could end up a Detroit Lion. If he was, I would absolutely be overjoyed about it. He's not a guy that I would be looking to reach for, but if you were talking Mikey in the third round, I'd be talking about let's have a beer to toast to it.
Yeah, I think the third round's a perfect fit for him. Round one, obviously, way too early. Round two's too early. Round three, I think that's where Mike falls. If he's a Michigan Wolverine converted to a Detroit Lion, home run. I think he's a. I don't want to tip my hand. He's a guy I'll probably be talking about later on in a future episode that you and I have discussed. So
Yeah.
I will say this: we've talked about all of his physical traits. He went to the combine pretty good at the combine 4.47 1.51 yards split. I think we talked a little bit about it with some wide receivers, and you brought up Justin Jefferson and his 10 yards, but I think it was 1.52.4.
Yeah,
Okay,
154.
so Mike Sainristil has a faster 10-yard split than Justin Jefferson, which means if you put Sainristil on Jefferson, he's locking him down. That's exactly what that means. Go ahead, hammer me in the comments for saying that he ran it a little faster, because I can predict the future. I know what's coming. So he's got all the physical tools. Let's talk about between the ears.
Yeah.
Because that's where football games are won, is what he does on the field, not just from a physical standpoint, but what he knows is most likely coming his way is what kind of separates him from everyone else.
100%, man. It allows you to play the game even faster than you already are, man. When you understand what's going on, when you can dissect the play that's going on in front of you, when you did the film study, so you kind of got a feel for what you might be looking at as you're getting into the play. That's the kind of player that he is, man. I think it's called championship caliber, right? And he's a Wolverine. That came from a national championship team. I can't say that enough. Exactly. So when you come from a championship pedigree, you do championship things. You have championship habits and championship traits, and he'd fit right in, man. Again, I would love to have
I think it was Jalen Polk, if I'm not mistaken, from Washington,
him.
was asked in an interview who was one of the toughest defensive backs to go up against. Without skipping a beat, he said Mike Sainristil. He said he was calling out all of our route combinations, where we were at on the field, knowing what we were most likely to run, jumping it, be it in the right spot, being everywhere he needed to be. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about how he wins games between the years with his brain and how he just studies. That comes from probably hours and hours and hours of watching film, understanding how Washington's offense was last year. I think they're the highest scoring offense in college football last season, and Michigan's defense said, yeah, hold my beer, because we're going to pretty much shut you guys out. And the leader of that was Mike Sainristil.
Pump the brakes, guys. It's not going to be a shootout, man. It's not going down today. Not today.
We're going to ugly this game up. That's what we're going to do. We're going to play Michigan football, ugly this game up. And I think, you're talking about championship caliber. That comes with hours and hours of film study, being a receiver, understanding what routes you're going to run on certain downs and distances and spots on the field. That's where Mike Sainristil is probably head and shoulders above a lot of cornerbacks coming into this draft.
Yeah, man. Like I don't have too much for Mikey, man. Other than if he needs help packing his things, making a little
that far of a drive.
I was about to say making a little trip for him in Arbor. Honestly, he can just wait in Detroit, and I'll just have his things ready for him.
Yeah,
no big deal.
And there's a lot of Michigan men on this team that could probably bunk up at his house, like Hutch, Glasgow.
Mm-hmm.
He's got some options for hey, let me crash on your couch for a couple of days while I find a place.
Yep.
The one thing I don't like is I've said this before. When you go to the NFL.com and you look up the people you want to see, like Mike Sainristil, you want to see his combine card. It has this little note next to it where it gives them a grade, and then it has a little note under it. So they gave him a grade of 6.20. Mm-hmm. And the note says, will eventually be an average starter. I don't know if I could disagree anymore, because I don't know where he's going to start at. He could play so many different positions. It's kind of like, you guys got to factor that in. Like, he's not a true corner. He's not a true nickel. He could play receiver. He could be a kick returner also. Like, I don't know if I agree with NFL.com's little note that they have there. I think that's a little disrespectful to Mikey Sainristil.
Honestly, I look at him as a nickel type guy, and but I don't shackle him to the nickel. I think he could also be a number 2 corner on a team that you absolutely love. Does exactly what number 2 corners need to do. So I think that's where you'll see him play. I think that he will be a starter in this league eventually, and he'll be one of those guys to where you just don't think about him. I don't think that you're ever gonna look at him and be like, oh man, Mikey, the lockdown corner, the face of the secondary for the NFL. That's not what you're gonna see. But I do believe you're gonna see is a guy that goes out every week in and out, competes, and a guy that flashes when it's time to flash, when the game counts and it matters. So.
I'll tell you this last thing, and then we'll wrap it up. Mike Sainristil has made big plays after big play for the University of Michigan. One of my favorite plays, you're probably thinking, oh, it's that interception to seal the game for the national championship. That's up there. My favorite Mike Sainristil play, and I said this at the time it happened, this will be remembered for decades. Two years ago, Michigan goes down to Columbus in the Horseshoe. It's kind of a close game at the time, and CJ Stroud throws an out route to the end zone to Cade Stover, their tight end, and he catches it until Mike Sainristil puts his paws in there, breaks that pass up incomplete. That was the play of the game that nobody really talks about, but I will always remember that play. So that's the kind of guy we're getting from Mike Sainristil. Cade Stover is a big tight end, and if you're not familiar with him, he's coming out in the draft this year too. He's built like a brick house, and Mike Sainristil went toe to toe with him several times. And I would say he definitely got the better of him. So that's the kind of player that we're looking at if he ends up to be a Detroit Lion. Just he's going to play. He's going to be a ball player. That's what we like. Well, you got anything else?
You spoke in a previous episode and you talked about Brad Holmes. You talked about Brad not being at Michigan's Pro Day.
Yep.
You talked about him being out there rolling the tide, right? I think Brad already knows what Mikey's about. He's already seen what he can do. And I think Mikey absolutely has to be on his radar. And I hope that he pulls the trigger, man.
I think Mike Sainristil should be on all 32 teams' radar. Just he doesn't have a position. He could do a lot of different things. Yeah. But you're right. And Brad Holmes was it this past year? He was at the OSU game, or was it the game I'm talking about in the Horseshoe? Do you remember? So the one in Ann Arbor?
Yeah.
So, yeah, he's gotten a look at him, and Sainristil worked out at the combine. I did talk about how Brad Holmes chose to go to Alabama over Michigan's Pro Day because I think there's more first-round talent for Alabama, but Michigan has depth from top to bottom in this draft. We got 18 guys. Who's the only real first-round pick in this draft for Michigan is probably J.J. McCarthy. So I can kind of understand why Brad probably chose to go to Alabama.
Yeah.
And I don't want to tip my hand on what we said in that episode. You guys will have to watch that.
I don't know. You might see Chris Jenkins go in the first round, man.
Maybe.
You might,
Maybe. I wouldn't bet on it, but it wouldn't also surprise me.
It wouldn't surprise me, especially if it's a team they're looking for a defensive tackle that's going in to stop the run. He's a dude.
Dallas Cowboys. That's a lot of people have said that Dallas Cowboys need big defensive linemen to stop the run. That might be a fit for Chris Jenkins, just off the top of my head.
They love them Michigan boys. Mozzie Smith's already out there.
Yeah, they drafted Taco Charlton a couple years ago. Jordan Lewis, Luke Schoonmaker. Yeah, they like their Michigan men like we like our Alabama Crimson Tide. So possibly he might go in the first round.
Yeah.
But guys, talked to little Mikey today. If you're not familiar with him, check out his tape. We have talked about him before. He might get mentioned, like I said, later in another episode that we kind of have planned. We're tinkering with. Hit that like button. Leave some comments down below. Let us know how you feel about national champion Mike Sainristil, the captain. Leave it in the comments. Hit that like button. If you're new, stick around, subscribe. We'll be back later with some more content.
Peace.